it happened. Some empires didn't fade away. They were there. And then, within one human lifetime, they were gone. That is what this story is about. Not when problems began, but how quickly a political world became unrecoverable. Once the final collapse started. 1. Ur-3, the empire recorded on clay. Start in southern Mesopotamia, where one of the best documented states of the ancient world left behind an absurd amount of paperwork. The third dynasty of Ur, or Ur-3, ruled through administrators, tax deliveries, labor assignments, grain shipments, and clay tablets. This was not a loose collection of villages pretending to be an empire. It was a centralized machine, and that is exactly why its final years are so unsettling. We can watch the machine stop working. Its last king, Ibbi-Sin, ruled for about 24 years. During that single reign, the empire lost territory. Food shipments became a crisis, rival powers broke away, and letters began describing shortages with the kind of urgency that bureaucrats usually try to hide. At the beginning, the system still looked intact. Orders were issued, governors were expected to deliver. But records from the period show the center struggling to control the very network that had made it powerful. Grain became harder to move, loyalty became negotiable. Then, around 2004 BC, forces from Elam attacked Ur. The city was sacked. Ibbi-Sin vanished into captivity. The most revealing evidence appears in correspondence. Ishbi-Era, an official sent to obtain grain, established himself at Isin and stopped behaving like Ur's servant. The first fall leaves us a warning we will hear again. The empire does not have to lose every city first. It only has to lose control of food, information, and obedience. To Hittite Empire, the capital that went silent. Hattusa, in what is now Turkey, was the capital of the Hittite Empire. From here, Hittite kings negotiated with Egypt, commanded armies, and controlled much of Anatolia and northern Syria. Then, near the end of the Bronze Age, the imperial center disappears. For a long time, this story was told like a single attack scene. Mysterious invaders arrive, burn the capital, and erase an empire. The evidence is less convenient than that. Archaeology suggests that important parts of Hattusa may already have been evacuated before final destruction. Royal authority appears to have been failing across a wider landscape marked by conflict, broken trade routes, food stress, migrations. That matters. It means there may not have been one final killer waiting outside the gate. There was a body, but the wounds came from several directions. Recently, the landscape added a clue. Tree ring and isotope evidence indicates 3 years of unusually severe drought around 1198 to 1196 BC, right in the collapse window. That does not prove drought killed the empire alone, but for a palace system feeding armies, repeated harvest failures could turn loyalty into a survival decision. Around 1200 BC, the Hittite imperial structure ceased to exist. The writing archives stopped. The central court disappeared. Smaller successor states preserved elements of Hittite culture, but the empire that had once stood beside Egypt as a great power was finished. At Hattusa, what is missing speaks louder than what survived. No victorious Hittite restoration. Just a royal capital abandoned, destroyed, and never restored as the command center of an empire. The Hittites prove that rapid collapse does not always leave one dramatic final battle. 3. Neo-Assyria, the terror that became a target. In the 7th century BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire controlled a territory so large and so violently enforced that its kings carved the results into palace walls, sieges, deportations, prisoners, tribute. Under Ashurbanipal, Assyria looked untouchable. After his reign, it unraveled with shocking speed. Babylon rebelled. The Medes attacked from the east. Former subjects stopped treating Assyria as an inevitable fact of life and started treating it as something that could be killed. In 612 BC, a coalition captured Nineveh. The capital of the empire that had terrorized the region was destroyed. Assyrian forces attempted to continue from Haran. A rump force survived long enough to fight again. But by the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, it had been defeated for good. From the death of Ashurbanipal to the destruction of the final Assyrian resistance, roughly 26 years. An imperial system built over centuries was effectively decapitated within one generation. Suddenly, Assyria's own capitals were siege targets. The fear holding the system together changed direction. But here's the twist. One of the powers that helped bury Assyria did not enjoy its victory for long. 4. Neo-Babylonia, Babylon taken in one campaign. The Neo-Babylonian Empire inherited much of Assyria's former world. Its kings rebuilt Babylon on a monumental scale. Nebuchadnezzar II turned the city into one of antiquity's great displays of wealth and authority. Yet in 539 BC, Cyrus of Persia invaded. The surviving Babylonian chronicle presents the fall in brutally compressed terms: a Persian victory at Opis, the capture of Sippar, and then Cyrus's forces entering Babylon. The imperial capital was taken, and a native Babylonian empire never returned. Cyrus later framed the conquest as liberation and proper kingship, that is political messaging, not neutral testimony. But the central fact remains: Babylon went from imperial capital to captured possession in one campaign. Babylon had monumental walls, sacred authority, and enormous prestige. Its quick absorption exposes the difference between looking permanent and remaining defensible. The same city that helped destroy Assyria became the next warning in the story. Power does not protect an empire from sudden collapse. Sometimes power simply makes the takeover worth planning. 5. The Athenian Empire, the fleet that never came home. Athens did not call itself an empire at first. It led an alliance against Persia. But over time, allied payments flowed to Athens. Revolts were punished, and an alliance became an imperial system guarded by ships. Then Athens placed an enormous bet on Sicily. In 415 BC, during the Peloponnesian War, it sent a vast expedition to attack Syracuse. The campaign became a trap. By 413 BC, the expedition had been destroyed. Ships were lost, soldiers were killed or captured. The city had not merely suffered a defeat, it had lost an irreplaceable portion of the machinery that made its empire possible. Athens kept fighting, and that is important. Empires rarely fall the same day they receive the fatal wound, but its subjects revolted. Sparta gained Persian financial support, and the naval balance turned. In 405 BC, the remaining Athenian fleet was destroyed at Aegospotami. In 404 BC, Athens surrendered. The terms made the reversal visible. Athens surrendered most of its fleet and accepted the demolition of the long walls connecting the city to its harbor. An empire built by ships was forced to dismantle its own strategy. 6. Achaemenid Persia, 4 years to lose a dynasty. The Achaemenid Persian Empire stretched from Egypt and Anatolia to Central Asia and the edge of India. Its administrative system had survived royal transitions, rebellions, and more territory than any Greek city could imagine controlling. Then Alexander crossed into Asia in 334 BC. Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, each victory removed another layer of Persian military resistance. By 330 BC, Persepolis had been taken and burned, and King Darius III had been killed while fleeing east. Alexander then claimed the position of king over the conquered empire. This is where the mystery gets uncomfortable. A huge empire was not automatically a hollow shell just because it lost. The Persians still mobilized massive forces. They still had wealth, roads, satrapies, and royal legitimacy. But imperial scale creates a terrifying vulnerability. Once the king cannot protect the center, every provincial elite has to decide whether loyalty is still worth the risk. 4 years after the invasion began, the Achaemenid dynasty was over. Alexander did not need to erase every Persian institution. He seized royal centers, pursued the king, and presented himself as successor to the empire he had broken. He took the controls before the old dynasty could recover them. 7. Qin, the empire that barely outlived its founder. In 221 BC, the king of Qin defeated the last rival states and declared himself the first emperor. His government standardized weights, measures, currency, and writing systems. It connected defenses, built roads, imposed laws, mobilized labor, and constructed the kind of burial complex that makes immortality look like a state-funded project. Everything about Qin authority was designed to look permanent. The first emperor died in 210 BC. Almost immediately, the succession became entangled in court manipulation. Rebellions erupted. Men who had been drafted and punished under Qin law found themselves with very little reason to protect the system. The state that had conquered all its competitors discovered that forced obedience was not the same thing as durable loyalty. According to the traditional account, in 209 BC, Chen Sheng and Wu Guang faced dangerous penalties after a delay while leading conscripts to a military post. Their uprising did not conquer Qin, but it proved that the fear holding the empire together had cracked. By 206 BC, the Qin dynasty had collapsed. Do the math. The first unified Qin empire lasted about 15 years. That is less time than it took to build some of its monuments. Centralization made Qin fast, organized, and terrifying. It also meant that when the center failed, there were few independent supports holding the structure upright. You can unify a world through fear. Keeping it unified after the feared ruler dies is another story entirely. Hate, Palmyra, Zenobia's short-lived empire. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was suffering an almost continuous emergency. Civil wars, invasions, breakaway regimes, emperors who sometimes lasted months. In that chaos, the caravan city of Palmyra became much more than a rich desert trading center. Its ruler Odenathus had defended Rome's eastern territories against Persia. After his death, his widow Zenobia governed on behalf of their son. Then Palmyrene power expanded dramatically. Forces loyal to Zenobia seized Egypt and controlled much of Rome's east. Coins and official titles help us track the moment the relationship with Rome changed. At first, Palmyra could present itself as defending Roman order. Soon, it looked like an alternative empire. That window was incredibly short. The Roman Emperor Aurelian marched east in 272 AD, defeated Zenobia's forces, and recovered the breakaway territories. After Palmyra rebelled again, the city was punished and its imperial experiment was over. At its peak, the Palmyrene Empire survived only a few years. But its importance is larger than its lifespan. Palmyra did not overthrow a healthy Roman Empire. It exposed how quickly a region could detach when the imperial center could no longer guarantee security. Empires do not only collapse by being conquered from outside, sometimes the edges conclude they can do the center's job better. 9. Western Rome, the office that vanished. The Western Roman Empire is the case people think they already understand. Barbarians invade, Rome falls, ancient history ends. The actual evidence is messier. Rome's Western government had struggled for generations with civil war, military dependence on powerful generals, shrinking tax revenues, and the loss of provinces. So no, the Roman world did not collapse in 21 years, but the terminal political failure of the Western imperial court did. In 455 AD, Vandals sacked Rome. The city was no longer the practical capital, but the event made the vulnerability impossible to ignore. Emperors rose and vanished under the shadow of military commanders. By 476, the Germanic officer Odoacer deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus. There would be no new Western emperor in Italy. And yet, this is the crucial evidence. Rome did not simply end in 476. The Eastern Roman Empire, governed from Constantinople, continued for nearly 1,000 more years. What collapsed was the Western imperial office, not every surviving Roman institution, person, law, or identity. That distinction is not a technicality, it is the entire verdict. In Italy, daily life did not simply stop. Officials wrote, estates functioned, churches operated. Collapse can be deceptive when routine continues beneath a vanished political roof. Sasanian Persia, a great rival, exhausted. The Sasanian Empire was Rome's great eastern rival. It had kings, armies, monumental art, a powerful religious establishment, and centuries of imperial memory. In the early 7th century, it came close to defeating Byzantium. Persian armies captured vast Byzantine territories, including Jerusalem and Egypt. Then the war reversed. Byzantine counterattacks reached deep into Sasanian territory. In 628, King Khosrow II, was overthrown and killed. What followed was a succession crisis so severe that kings and queens came and went in rapid sequence, while the empire was still trying to recover from war and disease. A state that had spent decades fighting now faced devastated provinces, court murder, and repeated succession. When new invaders arrived, Persia met them while trying to reassemble itself. Then came Arab-Muslim armies from the south. Sasanian forces suffered major defeats during the 630s and 6040s. The last king, Yazdegerd III, fled east and was killed in 651. From the murder of Khosrow to the death of the final Sasanian king, about 23 years. This was the collapse of a sophisticated imperial power after its financial, military, and political reserves had been drained almost at once. 10 empires, 10 different scenes. Some died in battle, some lost their food systems, some lost the king, some lost the fleet. There is no single ancient formula for collapse, but there are repeating clues when information stops reaching the center truthfully, when food and taxes no longer arrive on schedule, when armies obey commanders instead of governments, when succession becomes a fight instead of a transfer, when provinces begin to calculate that the empire needs them more than they need the empire. And then there is the most dangerous moment of all, when everyone realizes the giant can be beaten. That realization is the real collapse window, the point when repairable crises begin feeding each other faster than the state can answer. Had tablets, Hattusa had palaces, Nineveh had armies, Babylon had walls, Athens had ships, Persia had roads, Chin had laws, Palmyra had wealth, Rome had a name, and the Sasanians had survived centuries of war. None of that guaranteed another generation. So the next time you see an ancient empire drawn as one solid color on a map, remember, maps show territory. They do not show whether the orders are still being followed. If you want to keep hearing stories from the ancient world, watch the next video appearing on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The past was not simple. Our memory of it was. It happened, and then we forgot.